So if I would prioritize, like try to boil it down to one sentence, what I would say is that I am interested in using architectural historical methodologies, architectural history methods, to understand how modern built environments and architecture was shaped in this region in relation to property and revolution. So the ideas of property as emerges at this time, and how this both intellectual, like both discursive and material thing, impacted the production of built environment, urban, rural, and in terms of the scale of buildings, in moments of tumultuous sociopolitical shifts, as the revolution brings, in a revolutionary moment. Because when we discuss states, when we discuss new type of sovereignties, governance, it's always part of architecture. That's what we contextualize architecture with. But then those moments of revolutionary moments, the big shifts, are harder to detect in architecture. And that property allows me to do that, right? In those shifts, revolutionary shifts, what changes is not immediately visible in the built environment, is actually this property regime that gets organized. Yeah. And then I can trace the impacts of those shifts in the modern built environment by looking at property. If this answers.
But property, well, I agree. I don't have an answer to that. So I agree with any answer you would give. But property is, on the one hand, is official stipulations about property, and in real life, it's what you can do with property rights, which is not exactly the same. Sometimes you may not have private property as an official right, but you can use it as a as an object in real life for several generations.
And vice versa.
That's why I find it very generative. So the property is not only as a legal thing or an object, right? Because when we say property, most of us first imagine private property. That's because we come from a system that this is how the system is built. But property is not only a thing, nor it's only a legal right. Not only it's a regime, a system of how to moderate relationships, but also a social relation, a way of relating to one another, to the land, to country, to your ideas of identity and belonging, the place. That's why I find it a very generative concept. And so there are different ways I engage with the property, right? Sometimes property does, the way I engage with it is sometimes a property regime that's decided by a state. Sometimes it's a property dispute, right? That the two actors are not agreeing on the terms of it. Sometimes it allows me to bring legal questions into architectural history, which we don't really think about, right? As the right part, the property right as something that determines what you can build, how you can build, and how it's going to relate to other parts of the urban environment or the rural environment, etc. So that is why, exactly as you said, it is so many other things. It is that complication helps me to be able to look into different aspects of both the material, more like form and the shape and the location of architecture, and also more of the historical context of it. It enables me to look into relations between the people and people to their states as well.
If you allow me just to make it even more complex, especially in areas like these and in such long periods of time where you have, the dissolution of empires and new claims, property also has a in terms of cultural history, it also has a moral claim, which is really strong, and it's another use.
Totally, yeah, I forgot to say that, but that's an excellent contribution, yes.
Maybe I can jump in by saying that, well, we talked much about the merits of transnational perspectives, or hopefully bringing architectural history into the discussion about broader issues and understanding broader issues. But I was also hoping that you would prioritize property, because and to open up the discussion a bit, and maybe we can brainstorm a bit on this. I was thinking that after what we heard from them and what interests me in the project, I was thinking that maybe we can find ways to conceptualize modernization as a long process of negotiations, claims that are all related to property, right? Because we are, and after post-war, in the post-war era, we are transitioned into an era where ownership becomes a central theme of the US propaganda and the American modernization processes, also in the region. And then you have the counter part of the Soviet Union, where property is not an issue. And then all these different definitions of property that relate to moral, social relations, and ideas of identity, and you said something very nice, that property is both a material thing but also a discursive thing. So I think that this is what we all have in common. In my case, we don't have claims on, not so much, we don't have claims on land, like land rights, but we do have claims on partaking on the real estate pie that grows, and you want to make some profit out of it. And we have different often conflicting groups, whether they are ethnic groups or gender, like women that are emancipated, like different protagonists that come to the forefront, and the state somehow directs these different groups into taking part into the property claim party, let's say, and the real estate party in the after World War II. So I think that the whole discussion directs us towards understanding modernization as something very material in reality, that is related to the claims, different claims, multiple claims in property. So I was thinking that of course architectural history then comes as a second, as the outcomes and the results, material results of these claims are a second step, but what comes before that is that the issue,
the creation of the middle class, which is the
exactly.
main question, has to do
ownership,
with the accumulation of property, which comes from.
So yes, I was hoping that you would prioritize property, and I'm glad you did, and that's what I understood also. And what the whole argument she makes, that property-less people were, let's say, generated ideas about socialism, and that's what the Americans feared after and theorized as something very dangerous, to not leave people without property, because this is a thing that usually leads to socialist ideas. So, these things, I think, relate to each other.
Yeah, to answer the same question, if I may join in. So Konstantina's previous project, Anthropology, also similarly, for me, is a property question, right? And how that land gets to be built after with buildings. And But also this, with the project that we're gonna work on right now, from the outset, it does look like it is about the governance of ownership. And that is also like one of the reasons, maybe like even before studying as an architectural historian, one of the reasons how these things, very similar looking buildings, emerge, pop up in places as different as Tel Aviv, Cairo, Ankara, and Athens is the similar property understanding that it works. So that kind of like even continues my argument that a definition of a type of governance of a promotive property also impact on the shape and the form of the type of architecture that it emerges with. So that I think, even though, I mean, I put the map, right? So I'm working on this region that's in between things, in between different geographies, and then I kind of like the other project is in a different part, culturally, politically, and historically connected. That's for sure. But I think my argument that I try to put forth in the dissertation is applicable to the project. And I see that connection. Hopefully that's a bit clear. That is like the theoretical argument that I make does have a bit of power to be expanded and actually be applied to different geographies. It would be so that there is a problem with it, right? That it comes to look that not being if you expand the argument so much, it also loses its power in the ways that when you apply it to another place, there's chance that you're overlooking the differences in that place, in that period, etc. With that notwithstanding, but I am also aware that periodically it is different and geographically it's different and it brings its differences. But I think the theoretical argument about the relationship between architecture and property can be carried into this project.
Easy. The modern movement vision was build more floors in order to house more people in kind of social housing. Nothing. I mean, the architect, the guide architect who designed the city for the 3 million people like Le Corbusier, etc. And when it comes to condominiums, it's the multiplying of the properties that can be held in the same amount of space. It's just property based. It's nothing. They wouldn't choose that. It was just money making. Speculation, of course, and the multiplying the properties that can be held in the same.
But I think also what is an interesting thing, and that's different, is the idea of inheritance. The modern structures of inheritance is different, right? There is a reason why the multiple floors exist in polycatholic as it is here. And there is a similar way that it is in Turkey as well, that it becomes something that you can leave to your children. It becomes dowry for marriage, etc. So there is cultural aspects of it, which I think it's not the case, for example, outside of Eastern Mediterranean. I think it is similar in Cairo. I don't know if it is similar in Tel Aviv, but maybe it's not the same way. We could discuss other places where they have multiple story apartment buildings, right?
That's why I was talking about, I wanted to emphasize the modernization as a concept, because in this case, in the case of our regions, it also contrasts to previous cultural establishments and traditions, let's say, and how do these two marry to each other, and how is the transition achieved in each case? Because as you say, we need to relate to the particular context, but I think that the cultural is there, and also the modernization discourse and politics are there also, and the different property regimes or understandings that come with each one of them are there as well. So how do we transition from the one to the other? How modernization then represents a process of negotiating this transition.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I find that this also a very important aspect. Like maybe not as much, like it's not my central methodology as it is for Alekos, but this idea of the ground up thing that I think I see it in Konstantina's way of framing the project as well, because as much as like that we discussed the global international money flow that makes all of these things possible, right? In all these places, what Konstantina is interested in is that the negotiation that happens in the locality, and that's specific to the geography that we're all discussing and studying. And I think property, if we understand the ownership in the way that I try to establish as such, it also allows us to understand how the local response, the way of negotiating, way of being part of it, kind of adds onto the project. Because here in the Polikatoika case, here in the Polikatoika and also in like multiple story apartments in Istanbul, there is a way that the ownership becomes something that the inhabitant discusses, right? The reason of building the extra floor is actually a negotiation with the state to have ownership. Like
the state society contract is very key also. Like how does it revolutionize or influenced by the state society contract and the new relations into the Muslim state? Yeah. Under discussion.
And it probably has some relation with the clientelist system.
Yes,
exactly.
exactly.